I am Gloria González Fuster. I am a research... Hello. Dear panelists, we are starting. Hello. I am Gloria González Fuster. I am a research professor at the Free University of Brussels, here in Brussels. I'm the director of the LSTS research group. And I'm very glad to welcome all of you to this panel with a great selection of speakers. I don't know if you can hear me properly, but people eventually will just talk quieter. In the meantime, I do this little introduction so we can win some time. I would like to situate this panel. This panel is a bit special. Of all panels, it's called traditionally the gender panel, so it really has a history of all the panels. As you might know, CPDP has existed now for 17 years. At the beginning, there was never anything about gender, feminism, anything at all. So we had a constructive dialogue with the organizers at some point, and they said, yes, you are right, we need something about gender, about feminism. Go and organize this yourself. You're free. We will support you. We started organizing panels on this, and the first year, I think we were like in another location, but in a little small room somewhere at 8 o'clock in the morning. Then one year we were in the cave, in the cellar, also at 8 o'clock in the morning. So we complained a lot about this too, and we continued the constructive dialogue. Eventually, they put us like normal people on the main stage, and we are here. It's actually not the best room at all. It's one of the ugliest, but it's important for us that we are here, so we cannot complain now that we are here. We are happy to be here once again. This year, actually, the program of CPDP looks quite good compared to other years, so let me bring your attention to this fact that actually there will be two gender panels in this big room today, and there is another very interesting panel coming up after the lunch. It's actually a very special panel because it's, I think, the first ever panel with only black women at CPDP. That is, yes. That is great, it's great. You should be there, you should go be there, but the sad news for us is that we really look very white and we look very stupid. And I apologize for this, and I say mea culpa, and I have nothing smart to say beyond this, that blame me, don't blame them, and I'm sorry for this. I don't know what to do. It looks very bad, but that's how it is. But please go, stay for the other panel after the lunch, and also another very interesting track in the program this year is the Feminist Book Club. It started already for the two last days, and they are very optimistic people, and they have something at 5 o'clock in the cinema room, which is the nicest room that there's here, and they have something about sexual assault in the digital age at 5 o'clock today. If you still have some energy, please go, and it will be a great session. Having said this, everything looks great in this program at CPDP. You agree with me. At the same time, we have to be a bit critical, otherwise there will be no gender panel logic. And I was looking the other day at the cover of the program. I don't know if you had the opportunity to look at the cover of the program. I think it's there. I don't know what you think about this cover of the program. Have you looked at it critically? Is it there? I don't know how you would describe this cover. What is this about? It is, for me, about a little man who has many problems. You look at the problems, I don't know, is concerned with capital, with energy, with natural resources, knowledge extraction, and everything is bringing him down. What we can say is that gender is not a problem for him, I think, in this little picture. Race is not a problem for him. He has many problems that he doesn't have. So that's still something that we can put forward, that there are other issues what the general program is talking about. So what are we talking about? I will slowly try to come to this panel. We are talking about online gender-based violence. It has many possible names, but this is how we will describe it today here. There is in the title a reference to Taylor Swift. I put this there to just trick people into thinking that I will be talking about Taylor Swift, but it's wrong. It is a quote from Commissioner Věra Jourová, who tweeted at some point there was a scandal with the deepfakes and Taylor Swift, and she tweeted solidarity with Taylor Swift and all the victims of online gender-based violence. And I thought that was great. That was unexpected. That was fun. I will use it in my title. But at the same time, this panel is about beyond that, beyond solidarity, beyond sympathy, about looking about what is happening now. And the great thing for us is that things are happening finally in the area of the fight against online gender-based violence. So basically, and that's the final point of my introduction, we will discuss in 3 legal instruments. And I just want to perhaps try to get a feeling for our speakers. Are you familiar with them, yes or no? I don't know if I'm wrong. So we will discuss in a little bit the AI Act. And I think everybody's here after 3 days sort of familiar with the AI Act. Yes? Can you say yes, no, yes? It's magic because it's not yet published, but we all know this almost by heart. We know many things about the AI Act, so I'm very proud of this audience. We'll also be discussing a little bit the DSA, the Digital Services Act. Are you familiar with this? Yes, we have some experts on the DSA, globally experts on the DSA. And we'll be discussing third instrument, the Directive on Combating Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence. Are we familiar with that? Has anybody, one person, yes? No. So you can say that yes, somebody has 3 persons, but I think we are all less familiar with this, so just for you to know. So that was the introduction. I will not talk too much. I will give the floor to the great speakers that we have today. So I will briefly introduce them. We had a change, last-minute change, but we are very, very happy also with this change. We have Maria Molica from the European Commission, who is a team leader leading the team on gender equality at Justice. She has some past life in data protection. So you see there's also a life beyond data protection in case you want to move to gender equality. Maybe you have some advice. So welcome back to this conference. Then we have Katrien van der Geen, who is a professor at the University of Antwerp, also a public prosecutor. She has been doing research that she will talk about, but she knows really many things about the real dark, bad things that happen all the time, and she manages to always keep this smile and look so cool, and I don't know how, knowing everything that happens. So also very, very glad to have you here. Then we have in the speaking order, Ela Jakubowska, who is head of policy at EDRI. She received an award the other day. Maybe we can also give her an applause for the award that she received as EDRI. And I think the award was for the Reclaim Your Face campaign about facial recognition, which of course has some many gender issues, but she's now in charge of everything policy related at EDRI, so also very, very happy to have you here. And last but not least, we have Karen Melchior, who is a member of the European Parliament with the Renew group. She has been working on digital policy issues, on women's issues, gender issues in general. So we're really glad to have you actually back to the gender panel because you were once online. And Karen is not applying to become again in the future again a member of the European Parliament, so she cannot tell us everything that maybe she could not tell us as a European member of the Parliament. We don't know, but she can give us some information also to how we can deal in the future with these issues. So with this, I stop my little introduction. Every speaker is free to explain what they wish for 10, 12 minutes. Then we will have some time for discussion also with the audience. So please, Maria.
Thank you very much. I think the mic works. So I will be speaking mainly about the Directive on Combating Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence, as I've been closely involved in the drafting and the negotiation of the Act. But also I will touch upon the Digital Service Act and the AI Act, as we consider that altogether these 3 legal instruments provide a very robust set of measures to protect, in particular, women from gender-based violence online. First of all, I want to thank you, to give a big thank you to the organizers for putting this important topic on the agenda. It makes no doubt that the advent of new technology has added a new dimension to violence against women. If we think that 30 years ago, a tape of Pamela Anderson and Tommy Lee was stolen, the thieves wanted to sell it to distributors, but no company wanted to buy it without the couple's consent. So instead, they used the internet, set up a website, and sold it illegally. Only 40 million people worldwide had access to the internet back then, but it enabled the content to be spread to millions more. 10 years ago, a survey carried out by the Fundamental Rights Agency showed that 10% of women since the age of 15 in the EU had experienced cyber harassment in the form of unwanted sexually explicit emails or text messages or inappropriate advances on social media. 5 years ago, the World Wide Web Foundation and the World Association of Girls Guides and Girls Scouts estimated that 50% of young women experienced this form of violence. Today, you don't even need someone to have actually taken a sexually explicit image of you in order for one to circulate. The real image does not need to exist. When I read about the images circulating earlier this year of Taylor Swift generated by artificial intelligence, I thought, as I'm sure most women did, that if it can happen to Taylor Swift, it can happen to anyone. And the thought is terrifying. Given what we know about the relationship between technology and violence against women, I was not surprised, but I do believe that we can find a way to stop this from happening, and it starts by having strong law. In this regard, the Directive on Combating Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence is a major leap forward for the European Union, and it is the very first EU-wide law on this topic. First, the directive criminalizes the most widespread form of cyber violence, many of which were not addressed in the law of member states. They are also not criminalized in the Istanbul Convention, which is widely recognized as a landmark treaty to combat violence against women. Our directive, therefore, represents a legal safety net for women across the EU. It criminalizes four forms of cyber violence, the most widespread. In the first place, it criminalizes the non-consensual sharing of intimate material, including deepfakes. It also criminalizes cyber harassment, including in the form of cyber flashing. It criminalizes cyber stalking and also misogynous hate speech. Moreover, if the crime is committed against a person because that person was a public representative or a journalist or a human rights defender, then that would constitute an aggravating circumstance. On cyber flashing, I want to mention a Belgian study conducted under the supervision of my co-panelist Catherine van Heining, that showed that half of Belgian women and girls aged between 15 and 25 years have been cyber flashed in the form of a dick pic. In almost half of the cases, the sender was a person unknown to the receiver. And 23% of people sent these images with the clear intent of intimidating the receiver. But the directive does not only deals with criminalization, it also ensures that victims of cyber violence receive better support and easier access to justice. To start with the reporting. Reporting of acts of cybercrime are now possible via ICT technologies. So the victim can report acts of violence, cyber violence, online, including also evidence. And in any event, all the channels of reporting must be accessible, easy to use, safe, and readily available. Moreover, the directive stipulates that member states have to provide specialist support to victims. And this includes, for example, advice on how to document cyber violence and information on judicial remedies. Services investigating and prosecuting violence against women or domestic violence are required to have the right expertise and tools to effectively investigate and prosecute also cybercrimes. This could include, for example, tools to gather, analyze, and secure electronic evidence, or training for law enforcement on the specificities of the digital dimension of violence against women and domestic violence. The directive also requires trainings of relevant professionals so that they are able to adequately address this phenomenon. Third, and very important, the directive requires every member state to ensure that competent authorities, this could be a judge, for example, have the power to issue binding legal orders to the platforms where the content is hosted to remove the content or to disable access to this material. This is an important step forward compared to the current situation. Currently, indeed, victims rely on voluntary actions by intermediary service providers to remove illegal content, which has proven to be insufficient to efficiently assist victims. The procedures offered by intermediary service providers are often too complicated and, most importantly, too lengthy. Given the ease and speed with which illegal online content can be distributed online, it is essential that such damaging material can be removed swiftly, while, of course, also safeguarding the rights of other parties involved. Finally, the directive requires member states to encourage and support the setting up of media training activities, and this to combat stereotypical portrayals of women and men, sexist images of women, and victim blaming in the media. The directive also requires member states to encourage self-regulatory cooperation between relevant intermediary service providers, such as the establishment of codes of conduct. The Digital Service Act, the DSA, is a much broader legal framework which sets obligation for online platforms to act diligently and ensure the safety and respect of fundamental rights in the online space. But it works together with the directive. There is a relation of complementarity between the two. The Digital Service Act does not define what is illegal content, illegal online content. This is either left to national law or to union law, like in the case of the Directive on Combating Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence. For example, if you take the crime of non-consensual sharing of intimate images, the illegal online content will be the intimate images shared online without the consent of the person concerned. So the directive defines what is illegal online content, and then the DSA complements that by establishing procedure for the removal of this illegal content. But the DSA also makes a difference on its own. First, it gives the European Commission new regulatory powers to uphold the law and directly investigate the societal risks emanating from or amplified by digital platforms. And this includes gender-based violence. Second, while platforms are ultimately responsible for removing illegal content, it empowers victims who can now escalate complaints through an internal complaint mechanism if platforms do not promptly remove illegal online content or do not respond to notifications by users who are victims of cyber violence. Third, designated very large online platforms reaching more than 45 million users must take risk mitigating measures against the risk of illegal online content. This can include adapting their content moderation practices and allocating resources to this. The Commission has recently designated 3 porn platforms, Pornhub, StripChat, and X, videos as very large online platforms. This means that these 3 online platforms must take mitigating measures against the risk of illegal content, including, for example, child sexual abuse material. Moving now to the AI Act. This is a third piece of legislation that is important to mention in this context because it covers both generative AI and other AI-generated content, including deepfakes. Deepfakes pose a major risk for women. Research shows that 90% of all deepfakes that show nudity or sexual activities depict women. The AI Act stipulates in this regard that deployers of an AI system that generates or manipulates images, audio, or video content that appreciably resembles existing persons, objects, places, or other entities or events, and would falsely appear to a person to be authentic or truthful, so deepfake, shall clearly label and disclose that the content has been artificially generated or manipulated. In addition, providers will have to design systems in a way that synthetic audio, video, text, and images content is marked in a machine-readable format and detectable as artificially generated or manipulated. And now look at the future. When the internet was used to sell copies of Pamela Anderson and Tommy Lee's tape, I don't think anyone could have envisaged what the online space would eventually become and what the impact on women would be. This is why we must remain vigilant with regards to new forms of cyber violence and ensure that these are well defined in the law. In the meantime, it is important that we monitor how the legislation we have in place works in practice, and we understand where there is a potential for improvement. This is, of course, a job for the European Commission, but also for member states and experts in this field too. To protect women's safety online, the Commission is currently setting up a voluntary framework to bring together internet platforms and other stakeholders to better tackle gendered online content. The purpose of the project will be to bring platforms, NGOs, experts, and member states to agree on a set of voluntary-based commitments based on companies' terms of reference. So, in other words, a new code of conduct focusing on the gendered illegal content. With this, I pass the floor.
Thank you very much. It is quite difficult to summarize 3 very long instruments in 10 minutes or 15 minutes, but I think hopefully you have now a full picture of almost everything. I will have questions, and I hope you have questions. Of course, not everything could be covered, but some important research was already mentioned, so now we give the floor to the researcher coordinating much of this important research in this area.
Thank you very much, and I have a PowerPoint. I want to show you stuff. Yes, so this is research. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you everyone for joining into this discussion. And Gloria already introduced me. I'm a little bit of a particular animal in the sense that on the one hand, I'm teaching and I'm researching human rights at the University of Antwerp. On the other hand, I'm also a public prosecutor in the cybercrime division. So I break things, I make things. But what I see in practice, I take to research, and what I have from research, I take to practice. And during the last couple of years, together with an interdisciplinary team, we have been focusing on cyber violence, hate speech, online sexual abuse, and so one of our themes has been deep nudes. And so we have focused on the prevalence of deep nudes, which the only other study that has been done in the world has been in Australia and United States. And also we have been looking at those deep nude applications. Because if we talk about deep nude, everybody thinks they understand what it is. It is like a picture or it's like a video that with AI technology is made as if someone is nude. However, there's quite a variety of deep nudes. So, and that is really to understand what the market is. So in the market of deep nude, which today, by the way, is a big market, you have 3 kinds of technologies. The first one is the easiest one to understand. It's called the face swap. We all knew that already before AI, you know, these badly edited pictures where someone suddenly just takes the head of someone of a picture and puts it on an existing nude image. And what is new with AI is that this face swapping, you take a porn video and you put the face of someone on that porn video, that AI really makes that it looks 100% realistic. And so a lot of those deep nude videos that you will be seeing that are really like very perfect and very realistic are still based on this face swap technology. Take a porn video and you kind of make that into a very realistic video with someone else. And it's spooky. I really see, videos that are so realistic. Then you have the second kind of techniques, which is what we call the, I'm still a lawyer, stricto sensu undress apps. What is this about? So you have a picture of you and the technology will envisage how you would be naked on the basis of one, measurements, and on the other hand, of thousands and thousands of pictures that are out there, and they train the AI on this, these pictures that are out there on naked women, and they assume how you would be. And then this tech, as you can see, allows the person who makes the image to play with it. So you can change the hair color or the size of your breasts or whatever. So that is the new, I would say, newer kind of technology. And then you have the third one of, I think there's very little knowledge about, which is AI porn apps. AI porn apps claim to make your dream girl. I tell you dream girl because up until now, 95% of all these apps are focused on women. You can't just put a male picture in there because AI, it trains on pictures. And today, those algorithms are written on the bodies of women. You have this burgeoning new fringe market that also caters for male pictures, but it's still mostly female. And so AI, you give a prompt. You say, I want a woman with blonde hair who's like 1.70 m and has whatever cup, and they will create this very realistic looking woman for you who doesn't exist. What is a problem, of course, with this AI porn is that you can also say, I want a woman who looks like Taylor Swift. And then the AI porn will create a completely new picture, but trained on all the pictures of Taylor Swift who's out there. So this AI porn can resemble someone perfectly, but you could say this is not a problem because it's not an actual picture. I didn't actually use an existing picture of this person. So think of all these kind of, legal defenses that you could put up, like right to image, etc. You can debunk it a little bit with the AI porn. What is obviously the problem, in addition to violations of sexual integrity, the harm that this can do, is also one of personal data. I don't mean personal data in a GDPR way, but personal data because this trains on all our bodies. Have a look at the policies of most of those social media apps. They are very explicit on everything that's personal data in a GDPR perspective. But this trains on all this other data of your body you put out there, like your legs and your arms, etc. And all these tech companies simply use all of our pictures to create further harm. So that is a little bit the market. You then also have this kind of platforms, like it looks like a Pornhub with pictures of AI-created deep nudes, more like thumb sites, and they're huge. One of the biggest ones is Mr. Deepfakes, and just to give you an idea, on their top performance, they had 130 million visitors per month. So that shows you, I mean, the damage that is being done with this kind of imagery. We then did a prevalence study for youngsters between 15 and 25. We had almost 3,000 participants, and we made sure that it was representative of young people, in the sense that it was representative as to gender balance, also LGBTQI+, and also what we call then a different or a diverse cultural and ethnical diversity. We focused, and you can discuss that, but we focused on first, second, and third generation Belgians, so that we would have some more, you know, broader perspective as to who the youngsters are. It showed that more than 40% of the young people knew what deep nude was and could explain what deep nude was. If you go to boys, we go over 50%. 23% of the youngsters said they had already seen a deep nude picture. Almost 14% said that they received a deep nude picture. 12.8% said they know a deep nude application by name. And 7.8% said they already made this kind of pictures with these applications. Put the gender on that, take the males out of it, and those percentages go up. One of our conclusions of the study was, you know an app, you use an app. From our research, it was clear that 7 out of 10 people who knew a deep nude application, or males that knew a deep nude application, had made a picture. Meaning the availability of these applications means that they will use it. But are they actually problematic, these applications? Because, you know, if I'm a woman, I have a picture, I want to deep nude myself, what is the problem? So let's have a look at their terms of services and what is possible. So the terms of services, I mean, we focused on the 25 biggest deep nude apps. Biggest in terms of people having downloaded it. So some of these deep nude applications have been downloaded 75 million times per month, just to show you, I mean, how big this is. And they all provide for, CSAM is not allowed, you can't make child images, sexual abuse images with our application, that's forbidden. And also, obviously, you can't violate copyrights. So that is something that we found in all those terms of services. I mean, 3 out of 5 also said, actually, you need to be plus 18 to use this application. We're not going to check it. There's no way to checking it. But you need to be an adult. Consent of the person you're deep nuding, we found that in almost 3 out of 5 of the terms of services. You would think that this would have to be in every of those terms and services, because it's a clear violation of sexual integrity if you're going to deep nude someone, but 3 out of 5. So you could say, you know, they are aware of the issues. Problem 1, even though it's in terms of services, their algorithms are not written in that way that it prevents you from creating those images. And there's another thing. We also looked at how do they advertise themselves. And let's go to what some of those biggest deep nude applications and how do they advertise? What's their selling proposition? And there you see that it's not like about me and making my own funny deep nude picture. Nudify any girl online. See anyone naked. I mean, this clearly appeals to the young males in a more macho, toxic culture, where undress anybody, see the girl of your dreams naked. We found a lot of these kind of quotes on these sites. For example, that nice girl in class you can't have, just deep nude her. That was what we found on these websites. These websites, oh yes, if you Google deep nude, what you will get first is not what is deep nude, it's forbidden, etc. You will first get advertisement for these exact apps, because Google simply takes their SEO and the money to advertise them, and obviously young people who see all these apps out there will think, well, it's probably legal because you can simply download it. Also, what these apps do is they tell you, you know, whatever you do, it's private with us. We protect your anonymity. We don't generate your user data. Privacy for us is the most important thing. But that also, again, gives you the impression, deep nude anyone, even against the law, you will face no consequences. You're safe with us. And then, what is the impact? Obviously, the impact is huge on women. We had also interviews of women saying that they were sextorted, basically, with their deep nude images. And you would think, if someone tells you, I have a fake nude image of you, please pay me or I'm going to put that online, you think, say, I'm not going to pay, it's not real. We found that the vast majority of women who were extorted with deep nude pictures pay because of the impact, the social impact, the professional impact, the relational impact, harassment that might follow because these images look so real. We've had a lot of women who say, afterwards I became depressed, I was suicidal. And finally we found that the impact of the dissemination of real nude images or deep nude images was actually the same. The harm was the same. The problem is, if you go to perpetrators, those who did the deep nuding, and we ask, why did you do that? The most important reasons were, I thought it was fun, sexual desire, not revenge, not harm. They're there, but that was not there. It are young people who don't even think about the consequences. And there's this clear disconnection between what the victim feels and why the perpetrator is doing that. And making this connection, obviously these apps are undermining it by making it so easy. I'm going to leave most of the legal part to the others, even though I'm a legal scholar, because I really wanted to share our research. But what is out there? What's the next step? And this is happening right now. So several of the porn companies are now experimenting. And I've seen one that is really scary with virtual reality in porn. Combine that with this, and you will get, in no more than five years, you will get virtual reality, where you just put on your image and you can have a sexual intercourse virtually with that very much non-consenting girl of the class. That is where we're heading to. So we need to get not just the law right, we need to get the tech right, and we need to get the search engines also working with us to make sure that these applications are not out there. And then with that, I'm giving the floor to the next speaker.
Thank you very much. I was starting to feel sort of okay hearing about the new laws, that maybe the future was difficult, but not that difficult, and now I'm worried very much. But maybe we will come back to the question, does the new framework help us with this situation, yes or no? But I give the floor to the next speaker to see also what has been your perspective on these discussions and also about the future, please.
Thank you, and thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this really important discussion. As Gloria mentioned earlier, I'm Ella Jakubowska. I'm with EDRI, which is Europe's biggest network of digital human rights groups. Some of my colleagues are in the audience today. I'm going to take things a little bit back to the policy perspective, so policy nerds rejoice. For everyone else, sorry in advance. I am a very proud policy nerd. And in my time at EDRI, my focus has been on fighting biometric mass surveillance, so things like mass facial recognition in the public space, in the EU AI Act and beyond. And actually, I hadn't prepared this, but while Catherine was speaking, I was really struck by the parallels to some of the apps that we've seen in the facial recognition space. There's an app called Pim Eyes that's been around for years that has become quite famous because they've advertised themselves as being a way to claim your privacy and personal data rights online by finding where your image is online. Sounds great. And yet in reality, they've advertised it as, spot a woman you like, you can find out who she is, you can get her Facebook profile, you can get any information on her just by taking a picture of her covertly and uploading it to our app. So, I think in the biometric surveillance space, there's maybe some things we could learn there as well. I also have focused on advocating for a safe and secure internet in the context of the EU's child sexual abuse regulation, the CSA regulation. So I do want to also say here a content warning that I will be speaking a little bit about the crime of child sexual abuse. So coming back to the directive on combating violence against women and domestic violence, the EU law that was recently adopted, I do want to say that I'm not myself an expert on this, but speaking with Gloria beforehand, we see a lot of parallels between that directive and the child sexual abuse regulation on which I do work. And I want to set up by already saying how grateful I am to the digital human rights groups who have worked on this law for a long time. The analysis of Asher Allen at CDT, for example, who's on the panel after lunch, that I think we all massively recommend going and listening to. Also, colleagues at Superlabs in Germany and Corinna Vetter, who helped me get a bit more up to speed for this panel. So I want to thank them and note that they have been working on this from a digital human rights perspective for a long time. So I'm going to start now by summarizing a general position on the Violence Against Women Directive. I think as a basic premise, and like others on this panel, actions that take seriously violence against women and girls are very welcome. And there's a lot of really important stuff in this directive that we support. It's very clear in my work that gender-based violence and abuse, whether tech facilitated or not, are extremely severe violations of human rights. And they have an impact, of course, on the individuals who are the victim of this, but also at a societal level, standing in the way of us being able to have just and equitable societies. I'd also add here that trans and gender non-conforming people should be equally protected when we're talking about gender-based violence. And I think maybe that's not always fully the case in this directive, unfortunately. That being said, very much like with the EU's child sexual abuse regulation, which is still going through the legislative process, there are concerns about whether this Violence Against Women directive has struck exactly the right balance of rights. And of course, that's a very difficult challenge. But when it comes to this directive, there are some concerns that we see about the risk of censorship and the suppression of free speech. For example, some of the crimes that are created in this directive lack clear definitions. And we do see a genuine risk that this lack of definitions could therefore be used, could be politicized, could be weaponized against even activists fighting against gender-based violence, against queer rights groups, and even against those who are raising awareness of sexual and reproductive rights. To give you an example from the child protection space in which I work, there was a child protection NGO who a few years ago launched an online campaign against child sexual abuse. Their message was around ensuring that young people who had been a victim of this awful crime could know a little bit more about their rights, how they can speak up. And within minutes of this campaign being launched on Facebook, it was flagged as child sexual abuse. It was blocked, it was taken down. It took weeks for this NGO to get this very legitimate educational content back online. So, that was well-meaning, but it's very easy for these well-meaning measures to slide into accidental or perhaps even worse, deliberate censorship, deliberate suppression of certain content. And I think that's especially pertinent because this piece of legislation is a directive. So that means it's not directly applicable in the EU member states. It has to be brought into their national legislation. It has to be transposed. And that brings a certain number of challenges. So back in the context in which I work, I've followed closely the 2011 Child Sexual Abuse Directive. And this has a lot of parallels because it's a law that sets out the minimum criminal framework for child sexual abuse crimes, which the EU member states have all had to implement to transpose nationally. More than a decade after that law was adopted, we found that numerous member states had not properly implemented that directive, and the European Commission had to take infringement proceedings against a lot of countries. This law is now, it's been reopened, it's being recast right now, but it's really shown us that even though we've had a law that set out a criminal framework, the vast majority of EU countries have a huge way to go in terms of tackling child sexual abuse. There was an independent report, for example, into the French Catholic Church about 2 years ago, and it found that actually one of the biggest contributing factors in France, in the French Catholic Church, to child sexual abuse was the lack of mandatory criminal records checks for those who were in regular contact with children. So my point here is, there are a lot of really basic and obvious and societal level things that are not being done when it comes to the protection of children, when it comes to violence against women, girls, and all minoritized people, whereby law can be one part of the solution, but when we exist in these societal contexts, in these constructs, there are limits also to what law can achieve. And if we take these insights, these concerns about how member states transpose these laws at national level back to the Violence Against Women Directive, one of the biggest criticisms of this law was that it did not contain a crime of rape based on consent. I know that there were a lot of people who fought for that, and it was thanks to some of the EU governments that that didn't happen. So when there's been such a fundamental failing to properly address one of the most violent forms of gender-based violence, how are we supposed to trust that the member states are going to implement this gender-based violence directive in a way that is going to take these issues seriously? And, I mentioned earlier that some of the crimes are quite vague. So really, where we have that margin for interpretation, that margin for discretion at member state level, that really, really worries me. And from the work that my colleagues have done for years around the Digital Services Act, around criminalization, and around spyware and surveillance also, we've seen that in a lot of EU countries, journalists and activists are under attack. Sexual and reproductive rights are under attack. Women are systematically excluded from politics and power, especially racialized women. And I know that the directive has made attempts to cover this, but in the context of having to trust the member states, I do have quite a number of red flags there. So really the main point that I'm trying to make, and before I start wrapping up, is that what we saw with the 2011 Child Sexual Abuse Directive, and what we might see again, is that despite good intentions, law and technology could only be a small part of fixing a problem that is so deep-rooted, so entrenched in society. If we go to the root of gender-based violence, it's about power, it's about the normalization of sexism, misogyny, racism, transphobia. It's about intimidating women and minoritized people and keeping them out of certain spaces. And I think to a certain extent, this is recognized by the directive. If we look at the recitals, there's a lot there around intersectionality and around the specific risks for women journalists, women politicians. I'd be really interested, as the discussion continues, to know from my fellow panelists how meaningful and operative they think those provisions will be in the directive, or whether there is a risk that we are just protecting the Taylor Swifts. And what's more, I want to point also to some work that's been done by a coalition of 13 human rights groups, including in the EDRI network ESWA, the European Sex Workers Association, and also Amnesty International, where they've pointed out some of the gaps for undocumented and migrant women. These groups have issued a statement pointing out that the final text of the Violence Against Women Directive does not retain provisions on protecting undocumented women's personal data from being transmitted to migration authorities. And if we're really wanting laws that protect all women and all minoritized people, these kind of measures can really disincentivize a certain and particularly minoritized, particularly constructed as vulnerable group of women. So that for me is a real area of oversight, and something that if I analyze with the lens that we have at EDRI in our work on state surveillance, in our work on AI, where we've seen not only that the EU's border system is very dehumanizing for women, for children, for men also, who also deserve dignity and protection in asylum processes, in migration processes. In general, the approach has been really punitive. And if we look to the recently adopted EU AI Act, migration and border uses of AI systems have been excluded from prohibitions, excluded from strong rules. So what we're noticing here is really this systematic approach that's saying if you're a person of color, if you're a migrant, if you're an asylum seeker, maybe your rights aren't going to get as protected as everyone else. I could go on, but I think I've run out of time. I wanted to talk about spyware, about cyber stalking, and about the cognitive dissonance where, we have this EU law where cyber stalking, doxing, gender-based harassment are being called out and are being criminalized. At the same time, we have the CSA regulation going through the EU's legislative process. And this CSA regulation, many of the member states want to see a software called client-side scanning used to scan everyone's private communications under the guise of protecting children, a very legitimate and important aim. But client-side scanning itself is a software that essentially amounts to distributed spyware and would make cyber stalking, hacking and doxing exponentially easier for any malicious actor. So, on the one hand, we're trying to protect people from that. On the other hand, we're negotiating laws that would make that so much worse. But I also want to think, and maybe when it comes to the last section, thinking about visions for how we can have an internet that keeps people safe from online harm, from hate speech, from abuse, without resorting to surveillance and control. I think that's the million-euro question, and I won't profess to have the answers, but that's really the direction that I would love to see us moving more towards, not having privacy and data protection put as an opposition to safety, but saying how can we have a safe internet where everyone has their privacy, their data protection, but also their dignity, their freedom of movement, their autonomy, their non-discrimination, and all of their rights in the online space.
Thank you very much. I would love to listen to all of you for many hours, but we have to keep it short for leaving time for questions. I had a small question that I know I'm not supposed to do this, but at the end of the first intervention, there was this reference to a sort of code of conduct that is not a code of conduct. And you mentioned, we don't like the idea that member states will implement this. Is this a code of conduct, something, or whatever it's called, something that you like, something that you don't trust? Any views on this, or we have to wait and see?
From me? Yes. Yeah. Codes of conduct can be one tool in the wider regulatory toolbox. I think when we're thinking about interpreting things like this directive, also the AI Act, those sorts of things can be helpful as long as they don't replace strong legislative action, and as long as they're not allowing the companies who perpetuate this harm through having, for example, toxic recommender algorithms who will make content of deep nudes, other harmful content go absolutely viral because it's good for their businesses, as long as they're not the ones setting the agenda. And we do see problems with them setting the agenda, even in spaces like this, for example.
Thank you very much. And with this, I give the floor to last speaker, Karen.
Thank you very much. And I hope that we'll have some time for some questions. So I hope the audience is prepared to ask us the difficult questions that we haven't replied to yet. I think one of the things that is really important is to remember that the online world reflects the offline world. So when you have young boys and young men thinking that it's just fun to make a deep nude of the girl in their class and that they have the right to do so just for their own personal pleasure and amusement, This reflects a view in society of women that is then being made worse by technical tools. If we want to get to the root of the problem, we need to look at the attitudes that we have in the offline world and not just look at what's going on in the online world. Cyber violence is a continuation of the gendered violence that there is offline, which I think also the presentations today has shown. And we need to make sure that we understand that it's not a distinction between promoting the freedom of speech and combating gender-based online violence. Because gender-based online violence is actually undermining the freedom of speech of a lot of women, and especially, as Ella was saying, racialized women and the LGBTI community across the world. The cyber violence that they are living with is actually stopping them from wanting to engage in online discussions. Studies in Denmark have shown that most people don't want to debate online any subject because they don't like the attitude that they will be met with, and they don't want to deal with the sort of online harassment. And if you look at the attitudes to women online, then this is actually, which is worse than for men, then it is keeping a large portion of our society in engaging with democracy. Because our democratic discussion is not just in the physical space such as here. It is online. And you might think, oh, well, this is just the social media. If we just use the traditional media, then everything will be fine. But the traditional media are also dependent on clicks and being promoted on CEOs. So the way that we regulate technology and the internet has a deep impact on our democracy and our society as a whole. We cannot just say, well, this is just technology, and that has nothing to do with society. We need to make sure that the legislation reflects our society and also reflects the things that we want to have banned. I think looking at the DSA and the AI Act, it is only sort of implementing the ban on gender-based violence that we have in the Directive Against Gender-Based Violence and Domestic Violence. And it allows to sort of put things on speed. We're talking a lot about deepfakes and disinformation when we're talking about the AI Act, but I think the problems that we are seeing already now, the problems that we're seeing also on gender-based violence, will just be increased with these new forms of legislation. What I've experienced during the last 5 years in the Parliament is that most politicians and most lobbyists will say, well, you can just get the platforms to deal with this. We just need to have real identification of everybody posting on Facebook. You need to have your ID before you make an account. You need to have verification. You need to ask the platform to take content down. And then we've solved all of these problems. The CSA, the Child Sexual Abuse Regulation, is one of these examples. It is trying to propose a technical solution, putting the responsibility on the platforms and taking away fundamental rights from all citizens by allowing taking away the possibility of sending encrypted messages online through the client-side scanning, because we want to save the children. And if we can just use something technological, we don't need to worry about actually looking at criminal records, making sure that social services have enough money, that the police is well funded. We can just sort of apply magical tech source and solve the problems. This is very appealing to politicians and also to the civil servants in, for example, the Commission, that are being asked to come up with a solution. We need to do something about sexual abuse online. Find a solution, do something that we can do quickly that's not going to cost too much money, and then you get something like the Child Sexual Abuse Regulation proposal, which luckily the mandate from the Parliament was not as bad as the rapporteurs in the beginning proposed. We got the worst things out, but it's still very problematic because it's looking at infringing on the privacy of everybody in order to do something that's actually not going to solve the problem. So we need to make sure that we actually educate our politicians and the civil servants that are going to write the proposals for the legislation and also going to be implementing the directives in the member states. Because we do have now the Gender-Based Violence Directive that's going to be implemented in the member states. But we need all of the people in this room and at this conference to go out and talk with our member states and make sure that they implement it correctly and they don't make a loosely formulated text defining the different crimes worse, but make it better. Because that is the upside of it being not formulated as carefully and very precisely at the European level, is that we can still improve things at the member state level. And this is work that we will have to continue on. And I hope that in the next mandate that we will have a lot of digital rights defenders in the parliament. If we have a very strong right wing in the parliament, conservative part of the parliament, but also the S&D group has not been very aware of the implications of digital rights on the pieces of legislation that are supposed to save women and children. And we need to make sure that they understand that the easy solutions are not always the good solutions and why this is not so.
Thank you very much. I did promise a sort of right to reply, but I'm looking at the time. I would like to go to the questions unless there is an urgent need. I see questions, but I do have one question that I want to ask, because for me, so everything is interesting, but this question of is the new legislation covering the cases that you have described? I have tried to follow. I'm not sure the AI Act is protecting us because it's not the employers using, or maybe some cases, yes. And even the directive is mentioning some...
The directive, Violence Against Women directive, is addressing this, but it's also a question of how do you implement it and how do you use the DSA? Because in the GDPR, you've had sort of privacy by design, and hopefully with the DSA, we'll be able to force the platforms to actually organize their platforms, the design of their platforms with responsibility in mind.
But even, maybe just to nerd the legal thing, but it's, I read the directive and it says it regulates deep nudes or manipulation with AI of the images when they reproduce a sexual activity. But I think the ones where you're just nude thing is not that you have a sexual activity, so then I think it's not covered by the directive.
So we were involved as well in the drafting. And I think my main critique on how it's drafted in the directive was, and I think that's a little bit the same with the rape, that people say it should have started from consent. For me, that provisions should have started from sexual integrity and the transgression of sexual integrity. And if I look at the national provisions that are out there, they all speak either of nude and sexual activities, or they speak about a transgression of sexual integrity. It is clear to me from the discussions that were out there, both in the Parliament, at the level of the Commission, etc., also from the other texts, that what is meant is also clearly the deep nuding, but now it was phrased as sexual activities. So that is to be seen, how it will be interpreted in reality. And in fact, I think the Child Sexual Abuse Directive was actually could have been useful, because there the language was very all-encompassing to make sure that also these, not real images were drawn really into the text. So, if you're a judge and you get this case, if you take a theological approach, you would say, yes, nudes are in, that was the purpose also of the drafters of the directive. If you put it very textually, I think you might have a problem. So it comes back to how, at the national level, it will be interpreted, because at the national level, it will be the first place where it is, implemented and applied. So that might be a discussion that will come up in the future.
Yeah, it is true. The definition of the non-consensual sharing of intimate images in the part where it covers deep fake focuses on the sexually explicit activities. And the reason being that the intention was to be wary of proportionality. Member states, we knew, I will go back to that in a minute, only want the European Union to intervene on serious crimes, and so we try to craft the definition of the crime in a way that the most damaging form of deepfake would be criminalized. Of course, in the implementation phase, the Commission will accompany Member States and try to steer a wider interpretation of the term sexually explicit activities, so as to cover also deep nudes. And I wanted also to underline that also the threat of distributing non-consensually shared material, the threat of distributing intimate images, be them real or fake, is covered, is criminalized by the directive, just to end on a positive note.
Thank you very much. I promise questions. I see one question, and I see two questions, and I can take a third question if you have one.
Alexandra from the Future of Life Institute. So we've been doing a lot of work on trying to combat horrible deepfakes that target women with non-consensual intimate images. And I wanted to really focus on the just massive gap between what Maria was saying in terms of what the Violence Against Women's Directive does and what the AI Act does, and then Catherine's research in terms of what the reality is on the ground. And I was personally very shocked that not once in this entire discussion did we hear about developer liability, which from my research is really like the center, the like elephant in the room here. Like we talked about platforms, but platforms are truly the band-aid here, where you're trying to chase the content, trying to get it off the internet, when we've seen again and again that it's simply impossible once something is out there to truly get rid of it forever. So we can, go after the platforms, try to get it to take it down, and that's going to be just a giant fight. But again, that's the band-aid. And then we'll go against the user. We'll say, we'll criminalize you for creating a non-consensual, intimate image. We'll make that a criminal offense. But the problem is, oftentimes we don't even know who the defendant is.
Yes, we have to be true. That was a question, I suppose. The second question?
Hi, I'm Sarah Brandstatter from MLEX. I'm a tech reporter in Brussels, and I wanted to ask about more details of this code of conduct that was mentioned, and where does it stand and who is involved with that? Thanks.
Okay, so I don't see more questions. We take the... Who wants to reply? Maybe Karen?
Well, I think on the app developer's responsibility, the app stores are also a sort of a platform and need to also take responsibility in which apps that they allow. And then also if you have terms of service that are not reflecting how you actually advertise your app, then I think there should also be a way of going against that.
Yeah. Also to give another perspective on the AI Act, because something we said in coalition with loads of other human rights groups was that we wanted a human rights-based AI Act, and what we got instead was a risk-based AI Act. And now we've got these categories that say, in certain law enforcement contexts, AI systems are risky. And yes, that's absolutely true. But I think the big thing that is eclipsed there is looking at these more structural, systematic harms that I would absolutely agree with you are, also part of the development life cycle that we're then not sufficiently embedding in our regulation on AI. And, we have requirements in the AI Act also to look at bias, but from a very technical lens, right? It's just not sufficient. And when we have an AI Act whose initial aspiration was to regulate a maximum of 5 to 15% of AI systems on the market, rather than to say all AI systems need to meet basic rules, I think that kind of points to a lot of the problem there.
And just also a follow-up, you probably know where I'm standing in that discussion, but I mean, there was a lot of critique, and I think we've been also very vocal that in the whole discussion on the AI Act, deepfake was taken as a technology in general. While we were pleading like, no, there are specific elements that are extremely problematic and should be on the high risk, even forbidden list of certain of the... And I mean, that was discarded. Said, no, we approach this as a technology. And I think that's a missed opportunity. Where do I see the way out of there is that for me, this is crime as a service. For me, this is enabling actually certain, certain crimes. And if in the end we will find good cases where they were actually enablers and were aware, and you have this kind of stuff on their website, you know, let's see how far we can get in prosecution.
I can maybe take the question on the code of conduct. It's an initiative that was announced in the Gender Equality Strategy 2020-2025. We are at the beginning of the work. We are getting in contact with platforms, and we are soon setting up the framework. It will probably have a similar format as the already existing code of conduct on countering illegal hate speech online, because that model has proven to be very successful. Apparently, platforms take that being part of this type of code of conduct is a sort of label of quality for platforms out there. And so we want to replicate that model, but this time focusing on gender-based illegal content. And so it's in the making, so I cannot tell you many more details about that, but it will be adopted. It will be put in place before, by the end of this year or beginning 2025.
Any more questions from the room? Otherwise, I do have questions. No more questions from the room. I'm very sad with this. Thank you very much.
Just for you. Catherine, it was a question about whether or not there's been any work done on the training data for some of the apps that you've talked about. Yeah. Obviously, I'm guessing there's not transparency around the training data that's used for the AI porn algorithms, for example, but whether or not you know there's anyone working around that to try and find out, for example, how much non-consensual imagery is being used in the app.
So we have been looking at the terms of service, privacy policies, etc. And as you can imagine, it was quite intransparent and opaque. Some made a reference like, we do this GDPR proof, but you know the problem with that for this training of these apps. So what we have been doing then is to work around that and to more focus on other social media and see what they are saying about the use of those data for training. And today, if you look into the media, you will see there's some new information on the Meta group, for example, that now started to also ask for consent to use your data for training of AI system. No, they package it and they sell it. And so there's a lot of outrage that Meta is making it very difficult to, to disallow that use. But it is one of the first ones who's starting asking it explicitly. So in fact, it's a good step, at least that they make it explicit. So we are now more focusing on all the other who are packaging and sending it. But I don't know of any other research that is focusing on the apps themselves, because obviously, as you might imagine, they were non-responsive. They're not very keen for interviews. They're not giving interviews. And secondly, I mean, you can't take it from their website or the terms of service. So you need to have the workarounds of how they get those images. And I hope maybe some researchers will find people who worked for these companies and will have more information. But I imagine it's simply the general scraping from the internet, that is a technique, and then the buying from all social media that package our bodies for them to create it.
I think we are actually out of time, and it's time for lunch, which is like a very important time to respect. So I will stop here. I hope I see you next year in another gender-related panel. We'll probably have also still questions about these new developments. So please thank to the speakers, thank to the audience, and an applause for the speakers. Thank you.